Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, Quick Magic gameplay. This time around, we are playing as the High Elves against the forces of Clan Angrand on the map Carrick Drone. So, obviously in this matchup, you can see my opponent did a very Vanguard heavy build, and I was not really prepared for it. I'd basically done a standard-ish High Elf build designed to sort of deal with anything my opponent could really bring. Without really needing to bring cavalry or anything like that, focusing very heavily on this sort of melee contingent here. So, for my lord, I did decide to bring Tyrion. I think Tyrion's actually a decent choice, even against the Dwarves. He does have very good melee stats, of course. He can, of course, boost that through the help of Feint and Post. He does have stand your grounds. I brought Foe Seeker to keep his vigor up. Sunfang, of course, is and at the Heart of Avalorn. So Heart of Avalorn does provide a huge burst of healing. Oftentimes you don't use this one, but if you play atrociously, if you get stuck, say, fighting around Brindle or something like that, you might take quite a bit of a beating with Tyrion, and it's always nice to be able to replenish some of that HP. And Sunfang, of course, while not ideal against the heavily armored Dwarves, can obviously help deal with Slayers. It can deal with Rangers, and obviously still deal some damage to infantry. So I think, all in all, I definitely think Tyrion is not a bad choice, especially given that he's somewhat cheap for what he delivers. Alongside him, I do have two Eagle Claw Bolt Throwers. You can see these guys are deployed a little to the front here, actually, because I was expecting my opponent to bring a normal build, and you can actually see this was a big miscalculation on my part. Normally, if you see your dwarf enemy has a force numbering over 1,000, chances are they are doing a Vanguard build. Now, obviously, it's not a guarantee, but as long as you deploy far enough back, you can pick away, even if they do, say, bring a Dwarf Warrior heavy comp with some artillery, you can then later push forward and deal with them in your own time with, say, Eagle Claw Bolt Throwers. And that's why I deployed him here. I assumed my opponent was doing a normal build. I hadn't checked the numbers, and I figured, he's probably got some artillery, and I'll have my Eagle Claw Bolt Throwers forward deployed so that if there's a salvo, it'll hit Tyrion, and the Eagle Claw Bolt Throwers can immediately start responding to enemy cannons, goblobbers, that sort of stuff. My opponent did not do that, and so these guys are way overextended, as is Tyrion, in a terrible spot, immediately being peppered down by a horde of Rangers. Behind that, of course, my main line does consist of a Lore Master of Hoeth, who does have Earthblood, Harmonic Convergence, and Wissen's Wild Form, as well as, of course, Evasion, which makes him, and of course, with his bonus against infantry, his AP, and of course, the usual martial prowess, he is an absolute beast against the Dwarves. He's actually really, really good against them, and he will be providing support to this significant front line. 4 Swordmasters of Hoeth will be providing some serious punching power. These guys can hew their way through even hammerers, and will obviously slice and dice their way through any lesser dwarven infantry with pretty contemptuous ease. And they even have bronze shields, though it's not the usual 30 or 35% that you'll see. It's, I do believe, only 20%, so it's worth keeping in mind. But they can block a little bit of forward fire. Alongside them, 2 units of White Lines of Crates on the flank. These guys, of course, have 30% missile resistance, and while not being quite on the tier of Swordmaster of Hoeth, or nowhere close, really, they still do hit hard, and they will still trash most of the dwarven infantry. Finally, in the back, a single unit of archers is providing a little bit of support against Slayers, against Rangers. These guys, they can still be useful. They still do outrange the dwarven missile line, and obviously they are pretty cheap. I'd definitely say they're better than, say, a unit of Spearmen. For my opponent, obviously Vanguard deploying with a whole bunch of miners blasting charges, making up the entire front line, alongside the Northumberland's Ironbreakers as well as Ekerd miners. And behind them is a horde of Rangers, 6 units of them. Not going with any Ulthos Raiders or anything like that, simply 6 units of vanilla Rangers, who are immediately shooting down Tyrion. And fortunately, I was pretty quick on the draw, and I managed to pull away almost immediately. So you can see most of those arrows are whiffing, but nonetheless, definitely a pretty nasty shock. And these guys are backed up by 2 units of Rangers with great weapons, as well as the Ulthars Raiders, so definitely ready to deal with some heavy armor that I could bring. Finally, in the back, my opponent does have Dragonback Slayers, as well as Belegar Ironhammer, ready to reinforce the front line. Dragonback Slayers, of course, will trash just about anything the Hiles put on the table, and Belegar is actually a pretty stout fellow. He does have that silver shield, which is not the most relevant against the High Elves, but can still be useful. He does have Mighty Oathstone, which is an amazing buff, providing expert charge defense to all your troops with an AoE. He does have, of course, Revenge Incarnate, great self buff, and then Rally. So just a very, very potent lord in general, basically superior to a standard dwarf lord in any way. Now you can see the bolt throwers immediately teeing off on the Rangers, but seeing that my opponent is pushing in, I'm going to start immediately pushing my troops forward. I simply cannot allow. So one of the things people don't realize, I think, is that shooting units can actually tear through gun crews incredibly quickly. So I really can't afford them to be teeing off on my bolt throwers here. They will destroy them incredibly quickly. I need to push in immediately, and so I'm doing just that, pushing Tyrion forward, pushing the Lore Master forward to try to soak up some of the blasting charges, and in the meantime focusing on my opponent's backline. You can see just how much damage those bolts are doing on the back here. doing quite a bit of work, taking off models, beating up the Norgrimling's Ironbreakers by a huge amount, and you can see a Sunfang is going to go down, and we're going to see by how much it's going to roast these Rangers. You can see with their light armor, despite their resistance to magic, these guys are going to get roasted pretty horribly, and really take some massive casualties there. In the meantime, Tyrion does take a nasty beating, gets marked by Ulthar, but I do pull him back immediately. Popping Stand Your Ground was a big mistake here. I should have saved that for later, but nonetheless, it's keeping me alive. In the meantime, my opponent's backline is kind of buckling. You can see my archers are going to push forward and start teeing off. Fortunately, you can see that overwhelming fire from my opponent is going to take my Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower offline and force this crew to rout, and I do believe they actually shatter. Actually, both crews do rout here, so my shooting contingents are offline, but in turn, my archers here are whittling down the range with the great weapons, and quite a bit of damage was done by that raw fire. Meantime, the Loremaster Hoeth does dive in, popping an Earthblood, popping a Wiston's Wild Form, trying to keep the troops here alive. Wiston's Wild Form does, of course, provide some buffs to armor, which can still be useful, especially against all of the shooting that my opponent's delivering. And with Earthblood, it's going to be we're going to be very tanky. You can see the miners are collapsing rather quickly. The Norgling's Ironbreakers, of course, just anchor the line. The main problem is that my opponent just has so much shooting. He's going to be doing so much damage to me. It's a huge problem. Feanor Post, of course, is providing Tyrion with some level of tankiness. He's very hard for these guys to shut down. Even the Dragonback Slayers will struggle, but he's being slowed by them, so it's making it a little hard for him to disengage. In the meantime, though, the Swordmasters do plow through. They have started buckling these miners. Unfortunately, the White Lions are not that as good at chewing through these troops, so despite not taking huge casualties, they are taking a while to chew through these miners, and it's really taking them a while. That said, you can see the Swordmaster just raking in immense kills, especially considering these are Dowie. You can see 6 kills in the 60s, just running amok. In the meantime, Tyrion is running to the backline and doing some immense work. My artillery crew has returned. You can see the archers teeing off on the Rangers, trying to whittle them down, trying to get rid of these Ulthar Raiders because they're such a menace to my troops, to my relatively heavy armor. And unfortunately, I'm not until this Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower getting back into the fray. That said, though, the Swordmaster is doing an immense job here, chasing down these Rangers. They are, of course, Elves, so they're just barely fast enough to catch these guys, and they are applying some tremendous pressure on these guys. In the back here, Belegar is slugging out with Tyrion. I'm not entirely sure. I do believe Tyrion would probably lose in this situation, though it would be a close fight. Tyrion has obviously lost his martial prowess, but it would be a close fight probably. But nonetheless, I'm not going to stick around. I'm going to be diving into the Rangers with weapons here, trying to shut them down. You can see Tyrion does a little bit of a jump there as he plows in. Unfortunately, on the flanks, you can see the Swordmasters of Hoeth getting chewed up by the Dragonback Slayers with the backing of all this shooting. Obviously, the Dragonback Slayers would never stand a chance against them normally, but with that backing of the fire, they will be able to whittle these guys down, and these Swordmasters are going to get slaughtered because the Dragonback Slayers are able to run them down. In the meantime, over here, the Swordmaster of Hoeth, as well as the Lordmaster, cut down these Norgrimling's Ironbreakers, breaking them, and pushing straight on through to the Dragonback Slayers, who, of course, do not stand a chance. In the meantime, Tyrion is cycling over to the White Lines of Crace. You can see here in the pits, these Slayers slugging out with the Loremasters, really, or the Swordmasters, really not a match for them. They're going to get slaughtered with contemptuous ease. On the flanks, though, the Swordmasters are getting kind of picked apart because my opponent just has so much presence. He has all these miners coming back, being a nuisance. He's got all these blasting charges. He's got the Ikran's miners. He's got all these troops just coming back and harassing my troops. And, of course, the Swordmaster's 90 armor is good, but not that good. And so they are slowly but surely just getting chipped away at. And, of course, they're not able to just instantly wipe. Despite their very good melee stats, they're not able to just instantly wipe Rangers. It does take him a little while. So, of course, every bit of stalling my opponent does is helping him a little bit. But nonetheless, you can see the bars shifting him just pretty decisively in my power at this point. You can, in my favor at this point, you can see my archers chipping away at the Rangers. And the Swordmasters of Hoeth here, very healthy unit, chasing down the Ikran miners. In the meantime, you can see over here, Tyrion has dove in. He is being gunned down, but this is a big mistake on my opponent's part. Tyrion, despite all his squishiness here, or seeming low HP, does still have the Heart of Avalorn on him, which is a huge boon. Even if he takes that nasty pounding, he will be able to bounce right back and be stay being an absolute menace. In the meantime, the Swordmasters are pushing through. They are applying some pressure to Belegar. Belegar, of course, incredibly tanky even against them, but over time, these guys will start whittling him down. But with all this pressure, once again, my opponent just has so much shooting. I do get another I do get another cast there with the help of Tyrion. Managed to beat those guys up a little bit with Sunfang, but nothing too fancy. You can see Tyrion is going to dive in here, trying to just keep applying pressure to these guys, keep them tied down, buy some time for the White Lines to close the gap. Anytime my artillery is trying to come back online, trying to pelt away at my opponent's troops, but unfortunately there's just so few crewmen left at this point. I think there's only one artillery, or actually 2 artillery pieces still being wheeled around, so definitely not terrible. Over here, the archers, though, are basically out of ammo. They are firing their last 2 volleys. The White Lines, of course, though, chopping their way through the Rangers. Fortunately, over here, Tyrion does get caught up on the Norgrimling's Ironbreakers, and he is very low. And you can see he's at 541 HP. He's definitely dropping like a brick. You can see his normal HP is at 3,600, and he needs to drop below 10%. So as you can see, he's slowly but surely slowing it out here and getting whittled down. Fortunately for me, though, you can see Belegar, an absolute champ, of course, with the backing of all these shooting units, which are now being wailed on by the bolt throwers. He is able to zone away the Loremaster as well as the Swordmaster, so he actually beats him up there. Unfortunately for my opponent, though, Tyrion here still being a champ, and he gets that Heart of Avalon, which actually bumps it back up over Martial martial prowess border, and that is going to see my opponent's army tank as the bar swings decisively in my favor with that Heart of Avalorn heal. So definitely a pretty tight game. And let's look at the after battle stats just to see where everything was. Now, obviously, most of my troops were basically annihilated. The Lord Master was routing. Most of the Sword Masters were routing. Only a handful of white lines and one unit of Sword Masters were really healthy. The Archers obviously out of ammo, and the Eagle Claw Bolt Throwers, only one was still online, and not entirely. And then, of course, Tyrion, though, was very healthy. So I do think this is a pretty solid build against Dwarves. Mostly just want to show why it's important to always check what your opponent is bringing. Always see how many numbers they've got. If you see a Dwarf army over 1,000 troops, it is probably a Vanguard army. It is possible to do a normal Dwarf build that is not Vanguard oriented, that can get over 1,000 troops if you go very heavy on Dwarf Warriors and Quarrelers and basic units. Basically a tier 1 Dwarf army. Tier 1 to 2-ish Dwarf army. Obviously, that you might see 1,000 unit troops, but realistically, if you see over 1,000 troops, you're probably facing a Vanguard. And so, had I responded more adequately to that, I could have been positioned much further back, ready to kind of snipe away at my opponent's Vanguarded troops, pick away those Norgrimling's Ironbreakers a little better, chip away at those blasting charges, try to pick them apart before they got into range, and before they forced my hand to really push those Swordmasters into the fray. Nonetheless, definitely, obviously, this sort of army is very susceptible to just the raw killing power of these troops. Swordmaster's great choice against the Dawi. They really deliver massive performance. You can see 170 kills is nothing to sneeze at, and obviously 132, 108, nothing bad, and even 70. And obviously, fighting units like Norgrimling's Ironbreakers are very tough, and so it definitely shows some pretty crazy performance. Tyrion, like I said, pretty good, and you did see that Sunfang roasted some of those Rangers. Definitely not a bad unit. And the Bolt Throwers did a lot of HP damage, which doesn't really show here, but they definitely can be potent. Similar with the Archers, you can see 2 chevrons over the course of that game. Or I do believe 2. Maybe they went in with 1, but nonetheless, they gained some chevrons. For my opponent's build, if you're doing Vanguard, I don't think this is necessarily bad. You can do Vanguard. It's perfectly viable to do that sort of build. I don't recommend it personally. I'm not in a lot of cases, but I think it's perfectly viable. It's a perfectly legit strat that can win you battles. What I'd recommend, if you're doing, though, this sort of build, I would recommend bringing a Rune Lord rather than Belegar. I think it's definitely a better idea, just because you can get those runes off, get that support for your front line. That's not the greatest. Try to get perhaps some vanilla miners in there, just so that you can have a cheaper and wider front line, and perhaps use some of the extra money you have to get some of the Bugman's Rangers, because Bugman's Rangers are just a lot better. Finally, do try to, if your opponent, obviously, if your opponent brings a whole bunch of Swordmasters, it probably would have been a decent idea for my opponent to try to kind of spread out his shooting. He obviously saw that I had a lot of infantry in my army, that it was entirely infantry. Definitely spread your shooting out a little more, so it's harder to shut down the whole blob at once. Rangers do have 160 range. Obviously, great weapons are a little harder, but Rangers, you obviously want to spread out as much as you can, and then start chipping away at your opponent's troops from a distance. So I definitely think that was one big mistake on my opponent's part, was just letting his Rangers get clumped, letting him get kind of overwhelmed. Later in the game, they were more spread out as they had routed off, but that was too little too late. Nonetheless, great game to my opponent, A-Move Hacker. Definitely fun, definitely a fun experience. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below to keep up with additional content. If you have any comments, criticisms of your own, be sure to share those, and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.